You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tammy Urbanic.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. I'm Tammy Urbanic. Thank you so much for joining me. Journey for Truth Radio is always on demand and with many new episodes. If you're on Facebook, find and join the Integrating the Teachings of Jonah group. There you can be part of a wonderful conversation full of rich information about the teachings of Jonah, what he has been teaching, different tools and methods for your own healing journey. Again, that's on Facebook, Integrating the Teachings of Jonah group. My guest this week is Scott Chertsen. Scott is an actor with film credits to his name. He is also the victim of domestic violence. Now today, Scott will talk with us about male domestic violence, how it's viewed, judged, and ignored. Scott, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Now, many, but not all, domestic victims of domestic violence were in abusive situations in childhood. Was this your case or no?
Honestly, I'd have to say it kind of was, although to be fair, it wasn't in the household. For me, it was actually really in school. I was that token, chubby, introverted kid growing up, and as a result, my grades were terrible as a kid because you can't really concentrate when you're afraid of getting beaten up on the way to or actually in school.
Yeah.
So it does carry over. It's kind of funny you mentioned that, but it does carry over a lot into your personal life out of school. And as a result, I think the marriage that I had was probably definitely tied to it.
Yeah, it sounds like perhaps it was a reflection of the bullying experiences that you had. Did you not see any relief? Was there no healing from those bullying experiences in childhood?
There was later. It just took a little bit of time. I think a lot of it had to do with being out of the environment. Because once I was out of school, I was away from that. I can kind of get the chance to start anew a little bit and not really feel like I had to go there and be afraid every day.
Yeah.
You just get a chance to just, like I said, you get out of the environment. It helps tremendously.
Yeah, I was bullied as well. In school, it wasn't not so much a physical bullying, but a lot of mental, emotional bullying. And it's really hard. And I do hear people still say sometimes kids will be kids. They need to learn to defend themselves. And while children do need to learn how to defend themselves, I feel that there needs to be that adult interaction, that adult intervention, and certainly a chance to heal that. Now, with your wife, your marriage, what kind of abuse did you experience?
Predominantly verbal, psychological. There was physical. There was about 11 different physical incidences over the course of 2 years. Some of them would just involve being slapped across the face in the middle of a mall because we got separated. Other ones were injuries that were so bad they would take 4 weeks to heal.
Wow.
But probably the worst part of the whole thing really was the psychological and the verbal aspect of it. Getting to you up here is a lot worse than getting to you physically.
Absolutely. It really breaks you down. I can imagine that it might have punched down your self-esteem.
It did. And it was one of those things where to go home, you become afraid to do anything wrong. It's a very tense situation there. And again, it helps a lot once you finally get out of the environment. But for that 2-year period, it was pretty rough, yeah.
Did your wife show signs early on in the relationships that she was an abuser?
Yeah, she did. But you turn a blind eye to it because, at least in my situation, everybody in my life was getting married, they were having kids, they were moving on with their lives, and I was the guy who just got out of a relationship because the girl he was dating wanted to date another woman. So it's funny now to me, but really at the time it was pretty rough. But you take what is, in this case, I kind of took what was there. Naive mistake, I'll definitely grant that. But I stayed in it because it was better than being alone and dealing with the loneliness and the depression that comes with it. So I put up with the abuse because at least on the surface it appeared normal to the outside world.
Right, which I think most, if not everyone, will agree that that's usually not the best decision to go into a relationship because you want to avoid being alone. Usually it creates issues, which in your case it did. What were some of the signs that you turned a blind eye to?
The criticism, the critiquing that was going on, the little things where the controlling aspect, where if, she called and I didn't pick up the phone, why didn't you pick up the phone? What's wrong with you? And very micromanaging of my time and everything I did. It's one of those things that, if any money was spent, I could, it was what are you doing? Why are you wasting our money? It's like, you're leaving me on a 1,000 calorie a day diet. I'm pretty much starving here. I got to eat somewhere, but a lot of psychological control that made it very difficult to be around it. I think in a lot of ways, like I said, that was worse than the physical because it gets into your head.
Right. And I've heard a lot of people say that. How did you defend yourself or try to?
At the end of the day, I can't, because the way society looks at it, I'm a guy, I'm the big, tough aggressor type, so that was actually, believe it or not, used for abusive purposes, where she said that if I actually, swung back or defended myself or whatever the case was, she would tell the police that I started it. And given, again, how the whole rules of things are, guys are generally presumed to be the aggressors. So I pretty much let it go. I would just let her just rail for 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it was, protected the areas like the groin, the knee, and the face. But when she was punching the chest or punching the arm, I let it go just to get it out of her system. Because at least those areas I can hide a little bit, and there's a lot of muscle in areas like that can protect from it. Joints are a little bit harder. Groin is a little bit harder. But, yeah.
So you mentioned earlier just a little bit that it damaged your self-esteem. There was psychological control, some psychological damage. How else did this abuse impact you emotionally and mentally?
Well, I was separated from everyone in my life, the friends that I had had for decades, my family. Again, it was one of those cases where I couldn't actually be out with them unless she was there first. There were cases where I was going to go hang out with a friend and she would have a meltdown because, I think I'm abandoning her, I'm going to go off and cheat on her. And it's like, I've known this guy since I was 9. We're going to go watch football together on a Sunday. It's a playoff game. But that kind of stuff, too. So the only friend that I was kind of allowed to have was her or people that she was friends with. The people that I grew up with, the friends that I had, I was never allowed to see them, and it sucked.
Yeah, everything that you're talking about is classic domestic violence. It's just usually those roles are reversed, where the female is the one. But there are also same-sex relationships, female same-sex relationships, where one of them is the abuser, and then the same with male same-sex relationships, one of them is the abuser. But in a heterosexual relationship, you're correct. I mean, most of the time we hear about the female being abused and the male being the abuser. And there's this tendency to want to blame the male. But there does need to be this opening, and that's why I'm so glad that you're on this show. There needs to be that opening, that conversation, and talking about what about the men who are also abused, and that needs to be looked at. So did you attempt to address this through the legal system?
I did. Fortunately, the last incident that we had, which fell on Memorial Day a few years back, the officer that I spoke to at the police department was very understanding, because apparently he went through it personally himself, and he's like, say the word and I'll have her arrested. So it was good in that moment, on that final straw, to have someone who got it, as opposed to someone saying that, well, you must have deserved it. I had people basically that I worked for that were like, well, you're a guy, obviously you either A, deserved it, or B, provoked it. So to have someone like this in my corner was huge. I never actually had her arrested. I did file a complaint and had 2 officers come by with me to pick up a lot of my stuff that last night. But it was still something that it was needed at that moment. And I'm very, very grateful to, in this case, Sergeant Rice, who was there and he got it.
So he came with you so that you could gather your things, and then you left the relationship at that point in time?
Yes. He actually had 2 officers go with me back to the condo to get my stuff. And then I stayed with my parents for a little while because I had no place else. There were a couple of cases there where I slept in my car in the middle of January to avoid things, paid for a hotel room with cash, because it was just the thing about domestic violence. And you talked about how it's everything I'm saying kind of ties into what a lot of people deal with. There was a cycle to this. So you start out with the honeymoon phase where everything's great, everything's awesome, and then that anger just sort of builds over time, which not necessarily is involving you. She could be stuck in traffic, bad day at the office, whatever it is, things just start to grow until it reaches a point where they just explode, and then it comes back down to the honeymoon phase again. And this was just a classic case of that. So in a lot of ways, I started to be able to predict when these things would start to happen in this case, about 6 to 8 weeks, and be able to say, okay, there's another one coming, and just go on high alert.
Wow. Not a good way to live.
It's better. My life is a lot better now.
I can imagine that your stress levels were high, and which can oftentimes lead to high cortisol levels and just create a lot of health issues from there. So I'm glad that you were able to leave that relationship. And after you left, did she come after you?
She never came after me in the way that you may be thinking. She did try to win me back. She brought presents to me and dropped them off at my parents. I had a feeling basically it was going to be a specific day she was going to do that, so I made myself scarce. Told my parents to hide, and they didn't, but they just took care of it. But there was a lot of gift giving and a lot of honeymoon, probably a lot of flavor of guilt too, that I think basically she owned up to it to a point, but still, by that point, it was too far gone. We had separated once before because of it, and this was the final straw, this second time we separated.
And do you see her, talk to her?
Not since we got demarried a few years ago. I know very, very little of what she's up to. I heard something she got remarried, but then is using her maiden name again, so I don't know. But no, I haven't spoken to her. I haven't spoken to any of her family or friends. I always get that weird feeling in the back of my mind that it might actually happen someday, because whenever you have an ex, you just somehow run into someone, either them or someone in their life at some point. So I'm still kind of expecting that to happen one of these days.
Have you ever tried talking to people about this particular concern, meaning being a victim of domestic violence and being male, and you get insensitive responses?
I have, but the funny thing is, people are first of all surprised that it happened. Now, according to I think CDC statistics, 1 in 4 men are going to experience it in their lifetime. So it's an interesting number that a lot of times gets pushed off to the side because, again, I'm a guy, we're the aggressors, and men are from Mars, women from Venus, and all that. But the big thing is, I don't really get a lot of insults about it. I don't really get anyone looking down on me or blowing it off. I get a lot of surprised looks and a lot of people that are willing to hear my story, which is a positive thing. So, no, overall, for the most part, it's actually been pretty good, I think.
Excellent.
Yeah, a lot better than I thought it was going to be, frankly.
Now, how did you begin healing?
Well, the first thing I did was to get the hell out of there.
Right.
It was funny because in my case, I mentioned it before, I was on a 1,000-calorie a day diet, maybe even a little bit less, and it was very controlled. So when I got back with my parents, moved back in with my parents, the first thing they said was, "You have a home here, you're safe." But the funny thing that I noticed about that is I was still hoarding food. I was basically hiding food in my shirt, trying to make sure that nobody saw it or anything like that. And Mom was pulling me aside and was like, "Knock it off. If there's not a label saying you can't have it, it's okay. You don't have to live that life anymore." But that was frankly probably the only real super major healing that I had to deal with was in that part of it. I mean, knowing that I was safe, knowing that I can control my own life again and live my life the way that I had wanted to live, I think was a huge part of it. I think to another degree, having gone through everything, my childhood and all the beatings that I had taken then, had sort of in a way prepared me for the marriage because I went through it as a kid for a bunch of years, so I can go through it now. I didn't date for a long period of time. I'm engaged to get married in October to a sweet girl named Robin. So there's been healing over time, but I think a lot of it was just time away from everything. Living life the way I wanted to live it, be able to do the things that I wanted to do. And then when the time comes, you start going back out there, start dating. And in this case, like I said, get engaged. We've been dating for a little over a year now.
And is that what helped you rebuild your self-esteem and self-worth?
In some ways. I think being away from all the dating thing, being in an environment where I could feel safe and secure and feel like I mattered and I was relevant. I think that did a lot more for me than really any relationship could have done. I think in my specific case, I had always looked for so long to find a relationship to make me happy because, you see things in Hollywood all the time where, they're a miserable person and they get married and they live happily ever after. We all know that Hollywood isn't really true to life,
right.
But I had to make it, in my case, my true to life. And that really caused a lot of challenges for me, which obviously led me to the marriage that I had. But no, I mean, as far as healing goes, it's been pretty good. Honestly, I'm mildly proud of myself for it, but also very relieved I don't have to deal with that anymore.
Yes, definitely. Now, what advice would you offer to anyone who has suffered from domestic violence?
Your life today does not mean it's going to be your life tomorrow. What you live today, doesn't have to be the rest of your life. It doesn't have to be tomorrow. You can change in an instant. You can change your life in an instant. With somebody who's been through it, I can say that I heard from a lot of people who were telling me to get out of there, were there to support me, but it's very difficult sometimes to get out of there because they bring your self-worth down to a certain point where you're incapable of believing that you're good enough to get out of there. And at the end of the day, you are good enough. You are someone who is worthy. What is happening is not you. It is on them. It is their challenge, their baggage. The way I heard it once is that hurting people will hurt people. And I think that applies a lot because you hear about these people that have this cycle of violence that come from the challenge of their own. I think the support system, having people giving you a safe haven so you don't have to be afraid, to go back in the house and, pray to God to say, please don't let her be angry or let him be angry with me tonight. When you're not in a situation where you have to worry about that, I think that starts the healing process right away. There is a little bit of doubt, I think, when you go back out in the dating world because you do have this baggage left over a little bit. But with time, effort, and the genuine want to get better, I think it happens. And I think you can actually grow from it and become a better person from it because you've been challenged in a way that most people never have been challenged, and you persevered through it, and that's something to be proud of.
I completely agree with, first, getting out of the situation. Hopefully people can. I know in some cases the abuser has made that very, very, very difficult. But certainly leaving the situation, looking for support somehow, whether it's from a domestic violence shelter, which men can't go to. I mean, that wouldn't have been your option had it been worse. But in women's case, they can hopefully find a shelter and find some sort of support in the meantime of trying to rebuild their life. And then certainly looking at how did one get into that type of relationship? And you looked at that. You looked at, you had your bullying experiences growing up. Perhaps it wasn't effectively dealt with, and then you didn't want to be alone. You were afraid of being alone, and you entered into an unhealthy relationship. So certainly looking at that pattern so that you don't repeat it. And because you did that, it sounds like that you have a new relationship that is probably a beautiful relationship.
It's far better by 100 times better than that.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I have to say that a relationship like the marriage that I had does set the bar pretty low. So it's easy to actually match that bar and get above it. But in this case here, she's a sweetheart of a girl. I love her dearly. And it's something that I'm looking forward to the future. And this was the kind of thing that I think I had to go through to get to this point. Because, years ago, the whole thing was getting married, having kids. That was supposed to be my salvation because that's what everybody did. That's what everybody in my life was doing. And I was reaching a point where, you're by yourself on Saturday nights, you start drinking, you start doing all this kind of stuff. And again, like I said before, to persevere through that and to have something now that I have, both with her and the life that I have, in a lot of ways, I'm grateful in a weird way. Because I don't think I would have the appreciation and the respect for what I have if it wasn't for what I had dealt with. And I mean, I don't recommend anybody to go through it, but you try to look at the positive and try to find the good in every situation. And that's the good I've been able to try and take from what I have.
Certainly. I've always been taught that we never need to learn through pain, that pain is always a choice. But Nevertheless, when pain has already occurred, the least you can do is learn from it and to learn how it occurred and why it occurred and what led up to it, because everything occurs in patterns. And when you have a painful pattern and you recognize that, you can put an end to that and create or transform it into a beautiful pattern, a joyful pattern. And then certainly any time anyone needs to then work on their anger, perhaps anxiety, perhaps low self-esteem, certainly working on that as well, which it sounds like you've been doing very well.
Well, it's self-improvement on a daily basis. Not a lot, just
Certainly.
a little bit every day. Grow a little more from yesterday.
Yeah, I agree.
That.
It's the best we can do. Each day we grow a little bit more and learn something a little bit new. How has acting helped you in the process of this, or has it?
In some ways, I think it's just more freeing. When I was going through everything with the marriage, I was a financial advisor. So I was dealing with a lot of stress of having clients, of having a lot of agents of my own that I had to train, mentor, and develop, and being on a tight leash where I couldn't train and develop them. I lost a lot of my business and I lost a lot of my agents because I couldn't run my business the way it had to be run. And I'm not talking like 7 days a week kind of thing. I'm just talking about, she wanted 9 to 5 and I had training meetings on like Wednesday nights that I would train people, and being given a complete hard time and being afraid to stay at the meetings for too long added to a world of stress, both on the home life and also on the work life, and one tied into the other. Being where I am now and being able to do something that I frankly have always wanted to do, I think it's helped a lot because I do have a little bit more of a respect, having come from where I was a few years ago. And in this case here, I think is just what it really comes down to is the camaraderie that I have with people. I was at a film festival event last night, saw a lot of friends that I hadn't seen in a little while. It was just very freeing, and being able to live my life the way I want to live it and not feel like I'm on a leash somewhere. Yeah.
Now, what have you acted in?
Well, I just finished up something which just aired last night on ID Discovery, called a show called Evil Lives Here. I did something recently for a show on HBO which is coming out should be coming out this year, called The Deuce. I was on America's Got Talent a couple of years ago. One round and done. I never got that far in it, but I was happy to be able to be there for it. If you ever saw the movie Dark Knight Rises, the final one of the Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale trilogy, I was one of the cops that was in that giant fight scene there. We rehearsed for 2 days straight. We did the fight scene for 2 days, and honestly, it was one of the coolest experiences of my life. But I've had at this point close to 600 days on set in my career in almost 7 years. So it's been a lot of stuff, and I'm very fortunate and I'm very grateful for it.
It sounds like a lot of fun, too.
Yeah. And also the fact that basically I don't have the financial side behind me where I'm constantly thinking about the next sale. I just like to be able to just talk to people and not have an agenda.
Yeah.
As silly as that sounds, anyone who's done sales will get that reference and get that understanding.
I agree. I could never do sales. I think I tried that in my early 20s, and I said, no, this isn't going to work for me. If someone says no, thank you, okay, never mind. But you have those managers there that you want to push. So I certainly understand that. Now, where can people find your information?
Well, I'm the only Scott Churchson in the country. My last name is spelled Churchson. So the good news is if you Google me, you're only going to find me. But I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, have the website, the YouTube channel, pretty much every social media thing that's out there because, as an actor, as a guy who does stunt work and entertaining and all this kind of stuff, every social media outlet out there is going to help your business in turn. So the good news, like I said, if you Google me, you'll find me.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Scott, so much for being a guest on my show this week.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you, listeners, for joining me here as well on Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.